Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, a safe place for leading with your heart. Hey, thanks for being here. You, Me, Empathy is the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective, a collaborative mental health community designed to empower each of us to grow our capacity for empathy, vulnerability, and emotional wayfinding. Just a friendly reminder that this podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. No one is just a silly boy with a feely heart. You can support the show by leaving a review in Apple Podcasts, following us on social media at Yumi Empathy and Feely Human, and joining the Feely Human Collective community at feelyhuman.co. And now your host, Known Wells.
Hello, Feely Humans. Welcome to another episode of Yumi Empathy. My name is Known Wells, and this is episode 181 on surrender, ALS advocacy, and all the colors came out with my guest, Kate Fagan. Kate's the author of the aforementioned All the Colors Came Out, a new book about her dad. It's a love letter to her dad who died of ALS. It's about surrender. It's about impermanence. It's about holding the truth of joy and sorrow being not in opposition to one another, but holding all of the beautiful and valid emotions. We are humans who contain multitudes, and Kate's book is a testament to that. It's a wonderful book. Highly recommend it. We talk a lot about that and so much more, including evangelical Christianity, Bible Jesus versus colonizer Jesus, basketball, ALS advocacy and what that looks like, and why maybe it's not an incurable disease, but rather an underfunded one. Kate's caretaking, courageous mother, and the compassion that has grown out of Kate's heart because of this tragic emotional experience that she experienced with her dad. Before we get to the episode, though, I wanted to remind you that you can get bonus episodes of this podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/feelyhuman. And the show notes for this episode, as well as every episode of Yumi Empathy, is at feelyhuman.co. That's feelyhuman.co. That's also where you can join the workshop that's next week on June 9th. It's called Build Your Self-Care Survival Kit. It's led by Rebecca Haas, and it's June 9th at 10 a.m., and it's only $15 to join. I hope you can make it. It's going to be a lot of fun. Again, that's at feelyhuman.co. It's called Build Your Self-Care Survival Kit. And if you haven't left a rating and review for Yumi Empathy, please do. It does truly help out the show. Also, today is the last day to get 50% off the Feely Human shop. So if you want to get 50% off, today's the last day. Use code IAMWORTHY at checkout, and you get 50% off the pins and t-shirts and other things like that, excluding the workshops, I should say. And I guess the last thing I will say is thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Truly, I show up every week and do this, and sometimes it's feels like I'm sort of speaking into a vacuum and no one cares, but I know you care, and that's just my insecurity. So thank you for being here. Thank you for showing up. I cherish you. And I cherish Kate Fagan, and I'm so grateful we had this conversation, and I'm just going to get to it right now. So enjoy my chat with Kate Fagan on surrender, ALS advocacy, and her new book, All the Colors Came Out. Welcome to You, Me, Empathy, the official podcast of the Feely Human Collective. On this show, we explore the struggles, the triumphs, the brights and the darks we face as humans trying to get by on this wondrous and overwhelming pale blue dot. The intent of You, Me, Empathy is to talk openly, without judgment, about our mental health, our neuroses, our shared anxieties and worries, to create a dialogue that is vulnerable and deeply human and empathetic, and to share that dialogue with others to inspire emotional and cognitive collaboration and insight so we can, hand in hand, break down the stigma that make us feel shame and guilt for struggling, for feeling our feelings, for being feely humans. You, Me, Empathy is a safe, friendly space designed to inspire the beauty in each of us. Today, my heart is a kaleidoscope of brilliant hues because I'm here with Emmy Award-winning journalist, #1 New York Times bestselling author, ALS advocate, and author of the new book, All the Colors Came Out. It's Kate Fagan. Hello, Kate.
Oh, thanks for having me. Beautiful kaleidoscope. I've never heard that before in relation to an intro for me. So I am honored. Thank you.
Well, your book is called All the Colors Came Out. So
it's true.
And I having read the book and thinking about the book, it feels like an honoring of all of the brilliant hues that we hold as humans.
Yeah, I think the beautiful kaleidoscope I might steal it for myself going forward when I talk about the book, because I do think that is a very poetic way to put words to what I think many times the emotions are when you're seeing someone you love go through something difficult. It can bring out our very best, and it can be a huge taxing struggle as well. And so it is that kind of kaleidoscope of feelings and emotions, the good and the bad.
Yeah. And and most importantly to me it's an honoring of all of it, right? Mm-hmm. It's not seeing the sort of the joy in opposition to the sorrow, right? It's seeing and being curious and honoring all of it.
Yeah. And I think that, in fact, that last thing you said about the joy not being in opposition to the sorrow was probably something that I learned during the process that I write about in the book, in that last year of my dad's life, realizing that I could have both the joy and the sorrow, and it wasn't a zero-sum game.
Such an important realization. Yeah. So, Kate, I do want to get into the book deeply, but before we do that, we always kick off the show with an emotional check-in. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling a little adrift. That's the word I'll use, because I think, at least I've found in the past, whenever you put a story into the world that you've put a lot of time and energy into, you still have those human emotions of being impatient and hopeful and wanting people, even though they have their own lives going on, to stop everything and read the thing that you did. And so this is the third book that I've put out. And even though every single time I tell myself not to get wrapped up in expectations around what it might be like, because you can't help but feel like it's kind of a moving goalpost, right? You might want one thing for the book, and then if you get that thing, then you want the next thing, that very human thing that we do of always wanting the next great shiny object. And so
yeah,
that's kind of where, because the book came out a week ago, and you get so excited for things like that. And then you realize, this is a book about grief and death and loss and joy. And that takes time. It takes time for people to, if they're going to absorb it. And I still have my impatient self that wants, everyone to read it right now, right this second. So it's kind of a strange little place I'm in right now.
What you're describing is so human. I'd imagine everyone listening can relate to that experience, not being a published author myself, but putting stuff out into the world, and it's a vulnerable act, right? Putting your stuff out, putting your words on paper, putting your voice out into the world in a podcast or whatever it may be, writing a blog post, article, etc. It's a vulnerable act. And you, I mean, as much as like it's important to validate ourselves, external validation at the end of the day, like, is an important piece of it too. Like, we shouldn't maybe rely on it wholly, but it's a piece of it that's crucial.
Exactly. And I think I always try to keep myself in a place where I name the things I'm grateful for every day. So it's not as if this feeling of aloof or not aloof, being adrift, excuse me. Maybe I'm aloof with people around me right now because I feel adrift. But it's not as if I don't recognize all of the wonderful things in my life and that I don't have self-sustaining words and sentences that I repeat to myself. But there's always that, whatever it is, that X factor, or for some people a bigger percentage than for others, but it's always going to be there, where your mom can love something, you can think it's great, your partner can think it's great, but there's something different about somebody in a state you've never been to, a person you've never met, picking up something that you did and then saying that thing mattered. That is always there for anybody putting something creative into the world, as much as we tell ourselves, like, I don't have any control over whether that happens. And even though I know I don't have any control, that doesn't stop me from wanting it or thinking about it, even if I have these other things in my life that I continue to lean on and reinforce, because you can't let yourself get unsteady with those feelings. But they certainly exist no matter how much meditation you do or how much you're focused on only the things within your control. You can't help but sneak a little glimpse out into the ether.
Well, I need to say this, that, I mean, and I know you know this, but I will validate for you, is that you wrote a book, you published a book, like, and that's an immense achievement. And while it's sticky and complex and messy to try to, like, be present with that particular joy and not think about all the, why am I not getting this feedback at this time? All that stuff that we do that you're speaking to, like, you wrote a book, which is a fucking amazing achievement.
Oh, good. We can swear here. Yeah, it is. And more than that, although writing a book I'm always in awe of just being able to, like, be able to put that last word and, like, you print it out and you see it and you're like, it's a book. And that always is satisfying. But, like, I got to write a book about my dad and how much I love him and what we went through. And even being in a position where I could have that relationship and then be able to have someone package it up beautifully and send it to people, that is a gift that I don't take for granted, because people have had dads that they loved before, and maybe they're not a writer, or they are a writer, but things didn't go right for them and they never were able to, put that down in one place for people to read it. The fact that I got to do that, I know, and I try to focus on, even though there's that part of me that goes, but I want so many people to read it, because I want everyone to know him, and I want people to, to recognize it, all the human things. The simple fact that I got to do that for someone that I love is not a thing that very many people get to do.
Yeah, it's in many ways it's a love letter, right? It's a exploration of who he was, and obviously it deals with the caretaking your mother did and your family and your sort of experience with that, and your in some ways off and on again relationship with your father, which but yeah, at the end of the day, it's I see it as a sort of a testament to the impact that he had on the world.
Yeah. And I think that what we don't know when we're growing up, then if you're born into a family where you happen to have a dad who just thinks you're the bee's knees, or however that saying goes, and spends time with you and wants to share with you the things they love in that time, I just thought that that's how life worked. That you had, it was my dad. Of course, Of course, he's going to spend time with me, because why wouldn't he? We're in the same house and he loves things. Why wouldn't he want me to watch him and love him too, or go do him and love him too? But as I got older, And as we tend to do, not only do I start to see my dad differently, and I start to see the things, the flaws, and the ways in which our relationship veered off course and got dented by life. I also at times forgot to remember that having a dad that loved me and cared and gave me his time and attention is no small thing. There's so many people in my life who have trouble with the book, not trouble with the book, but they were afraid to pick it up because they didn't have that relationship with their dad, and they didn't want to feel like they had missed out by witnessing a relationship that was filled with time and attention. And so I try to stay cognizant of all of those variables.
I hear that. I like I like to view the world from a place of abundance, and so the joy and the beautiful sort of relationship you had with your father doesn't take away from any experience I had, right? So speaking to the people who were maybe a little hesitant to read it, I am personally, I am estranged from my father. He was someone who was pretty violent and abusive and scary and kind of shaped me into who I was. I've always been very sensitive and feely and sort of tenderhearted, and his rage was always a scary thing. So I sort of built up a lot of armor in childhood, and it got to a point where I had to say no, this isn't serving me, and so I can coming from that place read your book and see it as what is fucking hard is this thing that we humans, we change, right? And you speak to this so beautifully, in your, how you change, and, you go off to college, you do your thing, and your relationship is strained in some ways with your dad, but you're always coming back, and you're always curious about or just honoring the fact that people change, and we can also come back to where we were and investigate what that looks like. And I think a lot of times that doesn't happen because we're not honoring the change in one another. And I think that's an important part of relationship.
Yeah, it's gratifying to me that you point that out, this idea of going back. Because I think the book is not just about physically going back, but also about emotionally and mentally going back to the moments in our relationship where we each made decisions or exhibited behavior that changed the course of our relationship. Because I think that one thing I believed for a really long time before his ALS diagnosis was that I would have a striking epiphany. I think we tend to believe as humans that the universe will send a lightning bolt down and let us know when it's time. Just I think we believe that about this big thing we might want to do. I think, I believe for a long time, if I wanted to write a book, I would wait for the cabin in the woods, and I'd light the candle, and there'd be a glass of wine, and you just always think there will be a moment and it will be unavoidable. And I think what one thing I really learned in that last year with my dad was that's very rarely how life works. It usually works in just showing up repeatedly to change a dynamic. It's hard to change a dynamic in one moment. And part of changing a dynamic is you don't always have to go back and excavate, but I think that they're just like a house and a foundation. You can do some of the work over the mistake, but it's never going to be as sturdy as it could be if you actually, no matter how long the house has been up, 120 years, if you go back in there and you're actually, this interaction we had, even though it was when I was 17 and you were 39, it's still reverberating to this day. And so let's go back and talk about that, and not just move forward from where we are necessarily. And I think that is something that that when I talk to people who maybe are in similar positions now as I was when my dad was diagnosed, and I was kind of juggling, that new family, career, nuclear family, tug of home dynamic. I see people in that now, and one, they don't know how to not be obsessed with career, which I think is a big thing that many of us deal with. And then they also feel like they'll like the universe won't let them down. The universe will tell them when the moment for inspiration is. And you always have to make your own inspiration. That's how I've always done it with writing and anything I do. You make your own, and you kind of sit down and you stay present for whatever may come.
I agree completely. And I'm so happy that the book really illuminated that in many examples. And I think we resist that because it's scary, right? It's scary to do that work. It's scary to show up in that way. It's scary to be curious about and look back at those experiences because we don't know how they're going to feel, how they're going to sort of impact us or impact the relationship we had with this person. But I think we have to, as you're pointing out, like we have to like be willing to go there and sort of honor whatever comes up through that experience. Because if we don't, to your point, it's gonna fester. It's gonna bring discord in a relationship that could be sort of remedied or just made better through exploration.
Mm-hmm. And I found that it takes a lot of trust, and not necessarily, it doesn't always have to be in the other person, because there were times, less so toward the end, where I didn't necessarily trust that my dad would be present or want to engage in a conversation about past mistakes. That my mistrust wasn't that he would ridicule me or dismiss me. It was more that he would make a joke about it to move past it.
Right.
So the trust that I came to feel was more so in myself, that I was ready and prepared to go there emotionally if he was. And if he wasn't, I trusted myself that I wouldn't respond flippantly or annoyed, because I was in a strong enough place where I was, that I trusted myself in however that interaction played out. But but that would not have been true a few years previous.
And I think you just saying that and reflecting back and saying like, hey, a couple of years ago, I would not have had the capacity to do this is wonderful. It like shows your growth. It shows that you're reflecting back, which is, I believe, something we all need to do sort of continuously, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kate, there was this moment in your book that I like really made me pause and really, I mean, there were many moments, but this one really stuck me in the heart because it's something that I struggle with, something that I do to this day, something that I think stems from a lot of just, to be honest, just dealing with, in my own personal life, dealing with narcissists and codependency and stuff. Which is this? I'll get to it.
No.
You were talking about dulling future pain by sacrificing present joy. Can you talk to me a little bit about what that means to you and, how that has played out in your life?
Yeah. And then I would love to hear in more depth, if you're willing to share, which I guess since you have this podcast, it's like,
of course,
I know you must be willing to share about why it specifically, like why it struck you. Yeah. My dad always had this saying, and I think I wrote it kind of near that graph about dulling future pain, dulling present present pain and future joy, and like how it in my family it was presented, and I'm using the term zero sum game, like gain again. Is that my dad would always say, never let the highs be too high, because then the lows won't be too low. And I think those two things are tied up, and it came from a very rational place. And I don't necessarily mean that as a compliment for my dad. It was all part of a belief system that he had that went along the lines of, don't let the highs get too high, because then the lows will get too low. And then also it was wrapped up in the thing he would say frequently, which was like, you might only get like one or two true friends in life who will really have your back, you know? And he wasn't trying to put a number on it, right? It could have been 3, but he was basically saying that not that many people in your life are truly going to root for you when it comes down to it. Again, and that's coming from this skeptical, rational place. And so it's all wrapped up in this. And it also ended up being, for me, this idea of don't let the highs be too high, because then the lows will be too low. That anybody in my life who exhibited behavior outside of these like set parameters, which was like excitement level of, 80% is as high as we can get. Like, I don't like nobody jumping around a room, screaming in joy, not a thing in our family. Separately, crying, being like really emotional about something I took away, and it took me a very long time to deal with this, that anybody that was crying was trying to manipulate a situation. And so I think it's not exactly your first question, but these are all wrapped up in this idea that for a very long time, that if something great happened in my life, if I didn't go above 80% excitement, then that meant I would never drop below 40% disappointment, right? I'd always stay in this even keeled space. But the problem is I think I'm kind of gradually walking us toward, is that that's not the reality of how you feel. That's not how your deep inside self feels. And so I had to do, and it's continuous, because this was like a core tenet of my dad and our family.
Yeah.
So I still, like my wife now, if she cries about something, I still have that first instinct of like, how am I being manipulated? And if she gets too upset about something or too excited about something, my first instinct is like reel her in. So I'm still working through that. And I don't think I'll ever be someone who's like bouncing around a room with excitement, even if something great happens, nor do I think I would ever be, or ever be like, in a pool of tears anywhere, because it's just, some of that is just becomes ingrained in you at a young age. So that's kind of the background of why I wrote those and how it still affects me. But I would love to hear what it meant for you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I do relate in many ways. I just want to reflect on what you said, which is like, I think there's protection in there. And for me, I look at it, in my own experience as a form of protection. So when I sort of like realized that I was this sensitive kid, right? And being around, bigger sort of personalities, more loud, vocal, and sometimes violent personalities, I learned that I needed to be quiet. I needed to be quiet in order to sort of, I guess it's survive, but also to protect myself, right? So I did that for many years throughout childhood and then into my sort of adulthood. And to this day, I'll be turning 40 this year. To this day, I find myself, I'll be experiencing something that could be perceived as a joyful experience. Maybe I'm playing a board game with friends, or going for a walk with a buddy or whatever. And I am not always, but there are moments where I'm hyper aware of how much joy I'm exuding. And I don't want to exude too much joy, because that means I am having a joyful experience, and that's too scary. That's like being too vulnerable, right? That's also connected to this limiting belief that I feel like I don't deserve that stuff. Like I don't deserve joyful experiences, that I sort of need to temper that stuff down. So it's all connected to this like childhood experience of trying to protect myself and keep those things just lock and key.
Yeah, I feel very similarly about crying, which is just that even if I start crying about something in an interpersonal interaction, my first thought is like, am I performing this right now? So it's kind of tangential to what you're saying, and that's a very ingrained childhood belief, like where maybe my dad and I we would maybe be arguing about something, and when you're young, you can't, and you have all the feelings and all the emotions, and you don't know where they're going to go. And then if I started crying, he'd be like, well, don't do that. It was almost like this, like his belief was what I was inferring from it was that me doing that was like
crying was bad.
It was an ace card. It was like a trump card I was trying to play on it, rather than just a natural reaction from a young person who's feeling all the feelings.
Interesting.
And so even to this day, if I start crying, I immediately have this reaction. If I'm around someone, I try to reassure them, like, just having a moment, but I don't need anything from you. I'm not trying to get anything from you. I'm just hearing my feelings just for me, for my feelings. And I actually articulate these things so that no one thinks I'm working some angle, which I don't think this is an unusual pattern. I don't think I'm the only one who has certain feelings around crying, but thankfully my wife does not think that every time I cry, it's a manipulation tactic, even though I verbalize that I'm not looking for anything from her when I'm crying.
Yeah. It's why we need those people to remind us, right? Because blanket statement, crying is not bad. Crying is crying. Crying is maybe a natural byproduct of feeling big feelings. And, leaning into our big feelings is how we're going to discern like the proper response, right? How we're going to discern the truth and figure out what is the truth. And, for like recovering codependents like me, like figure out like, are these my feelings or are they someone else's, right? Yeah. But we have to lean into it, and it's interesting, like, your experience with your father and him saying, "Oh, don't do that," and you interpreting that as like, I was trying to maybe pull one over on him or something. But like, I think of like the parent telling the kids, "Oh, don't cry," as a way, and the sort of maybe more common interpretation could be, "Oh, crying is bad," right? Crying, like I like crying, like they don't like crying, so I should not cry. There's a lot of that happens as well.
Mm-hmm. When I don't know, maybe my dad really just meant it makes me sad when you cry, right? Not, or, and a lot of parents, I think, maybe don't cry because it's like, it hurts them when you cry. Not that these are things, not that that means people shouldn't be crying, but sometimes there are less nefarious motives for why people might verbalize like that crying is affecting them in some way.
Well, and that's, I feel like this is the curiosity work that we need to do as humans, which is like allow people to be in their feelings because they're uniquely personal. They're not about us, they're not necessarily true or valid, but they need to be looked at, because, I think, as you know very well, like there's just a lot of, there's a scarcity mindset in the world. There's a competitive thing at play. There's capitalism. There's all these like sort of systems at play that like just want to pit us against one another. And I think like the more we can sort of defend against that, the easier this stuff will be.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife and I have been talking a lot about every time we're like trying to get to the heart of a problem, we're like, racism and capitalism. There we go. We got it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all there for
Yep.
sure. Yeah. So, your book, All the Colors, came out. I read it. I finished it about a week ago now. It's been sitting with me. There's so many points in the book that I feel like are so. I mean, even part of this the subtitle, Kate, is like, all these lessons you learned, and I'm telling the listener now, there's so many lessons in this book around empathy and risk taking and relationship and all this stuff. And so I'm not sure where to go next, but I am going to find it as I talk, and maybe I'll find it at the end of this sentence.
That's so funny. It reminds me of when I would do TV at ESPN, and sometimes I'd start going and I'm like, and sometimes I wouldn't know where I was going, but
yeah.
And it's a thing that not enough people acknowledge is happening. We always seem to pretend that we have purpose and we know where everything is going and we know why we're saying something. But I often found, well, now maybe I'm just trying to help you, but this truly is a thing that I don't think enough people acknowledge. Is sometimes you can just start you're talking and like you'll figure it out as you get going.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that, and I remember that from the book, and thank you for that empathy, Kate. You've had that experience yourself. Yes. You're like, I know, I've been there. Yeah, I love that. Let's talk a little bit about ALS, I guess. One thing you said in the book, which is just so devastating to me, and I want to just honor a lot of the sort of beautiful, like very like truthful moments you had with your family and your dad leading up to his death. And one thing you said that I want to read out loud right here is, to restore the quality of our lives, my dad's needed to end. The last cruel mindfuck of a disease filled with mindfucks. Just so devastating. And I want to, like, I don't know much about ALS. So you being someone obviously who's been profoundly impacted by it personally in your family, like, can you talk a little bit about what it is, the disease, like where we're at sort of medical wise, like with it, like all that stuff?
Yeah. Well, thank you for that opportunity, because it's something that my family and that I take to heart, is how often misunderstood ALS is, or not understood at all. Because there's an organization that I work with called I Am ALS, and it's a former Obama staffer who was diagnosed at 37. So they do data because he's a data kind of guy. And they came back with all of these really eye-opening statistics about ALS. Like one of them being, I'd have to be on the site exactly, but it's something like only 60% of people know that ALS is always fatal. And it's a similar number, like only 40% knew or know what the Ice Bucket Challenge, the viral social media campaign from about 5 or 6 years ago, they didn't even know what disease the Ice Bucket Challenge was supporting financially to find a cure. So just to go back to the beginning, ALS is also known as Lou Gehrig's disease. It's 100% fatal. There's no known cure. There's no treatment that's truly effective. Like it's just negligible. Some of the data might say if you get on something, it might add 3 months to your life. But ALS is just such a sporadic disease in terms of how it hits people. It's not consistent in terms of, what limbs it affects first, or whether it will sometimes affect your swallowing mechanism and your breathing first. So it's a gradual shutting down of your muscles, and included in your body's muscles are your swallowing mechanism, your lungs, and your heart. And it's many people will have an onset called bulbar onset, which is in your lungs and your swallowing. And that has a much quicker, it's something like a year life expectancy. And others, it might start, like my dad, it started in his left hand. And he started noticing that when he was playing pickup, because up until actually through his diagnosis, he would play pickup twice a week, basketball. And he started noticing passes that were coming to his left hand, he was dropping them. And that is where the disease started, was in his left hand. Then it moved up his arm into his shoulder, and it'll often move clockwise or counterclockwise. Then it went into his right shoulder, and around. But I think, so that those are the specifics of ALS, but some of the broad things that I think are really important for people to understand is that ALS, the life expectancy is so short that it's difficult for ALS to create a community that is consistent enough over a long period of time to affect change. And so it's important to know that. I mean, there are people, caregivers, like specific caregivers, like my mom or our family of people with ALS, like we still try to stay involved, but it's very different than a survivor group that is going on walks and like it will be involved in raising money and awareness for a disease for as long as they remain alive. So that's one thing. What's one challenge ALS has. The second challenge that ALS has is that not many people who have ALS feel like themselves anymore. And therefore they don't want, even while they're alive, they don't want to be representative of the disease because it is a very horrific disease. And if before my dad had it, I happened to know about it and have people in my life because I work in the sports world, and ALS strikes athletes and military at a higher rate than the general population. And so you'll have a lot of former NFL players, and perhaps there's a link, we don't know, to concussions or brain injury with ALS. But so I was aware of the disease and it had been in my life, but most people, if it's not in your life and you see someone with ALS or you hear about it, you don't want to think about that. It's a very difficult disease to see. My dad had this struggle when we would go into the Columbia Lou Gehrig Center in Manhattan when he would go for his annual checkups. In the beginning, he still had a lot of function. Maybe his left arm wasn't working, but he could still walk. His breathing was still regular, but he would go in and, the waiting room might be two people in motorized wheelchairs who can no longer move or talk. And he didn't want to see that. And so this is my long runway to this second issue that ALS faces, is that many people don't want to be the ambassador for it because it's not how they see themselves, and they don't want that to be the way people associate. But not all. Like like you've got Steve Gleason, he's a former New Orleans Saint, and you've got other folks who have ALS who have done remarkable work. But there's also a percentage who, and this is so sad, that will like completely stay in their homes because they don't like who they become. And I write it in the book that my dad struggled with that very, very deeply. So these are all of the things, that I just talking about, getting people to understand, because it's almost a thought experiment that I often have with myself. When it comes to what diseases we want to eradicate, certainly one that is proliferated, like a cancer, and the percentage chance that we could get cancer it scares us because it's so higher than so many other diseases. So of course we're attacking a cure for that. But separately, I also don't want to live in a world where I know although it's rarer, there's this chance that I get this disease over here that is brutal and 100% fatal and locks you in your own body. Like, I don't want to live in a world where that disease exists either. And it's kind of this thought experiment for a lot of people in the ALS community about what deserves our attention and resources, a thing that's rarer, but potent and devastating in a way, unlike many other diseases. Like, I think we have to, there are people within the ALS community, and I think it's very true, who say ALS is not an incurable disease. It's an underfunded disease for all of the reasons I just spent 7 minutes telling your listeners, but thank you for that opportunity, because it's incredibly important, everybody in the ALS community, that there's more widespread understanding of what the disease actually is.
I thank you for that. And I, to be transparent with you, I don't know much about ALS, and I, at the end of the day, like, I feel like in my heart, it's where I'm getting to, like, it feels like we as a human population, the ethos that maybe we all need to hold is we need to protect the most vulnerable. And what does that look like? And it may look like, funding more, or just maybe, a piece of it is awareness, right? Like getting aware and sort of self-educating and getting used to thinking about the stuff that we may not personally experience and know. And like, if I'm going to like take that sort of example sort of into the world of mental health, like that's precisely what this show is, right? Like I am talking to people who experience very specific, things, Jess Murnane, right? She had endometriosis and she's written a book about it and she talks about that. And she's very passionate about talking about that because she's experienced it personally. And, and people come on, schizophrenia and whatever. Like, I feel like that's like part of the, maybe personal exercise that we need to do is thinking about this stuff, thinking about the experiences of others, because like, to your point, like, we don't know if we're going to get it. We don't know what our future holds. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And, the other piece, as you're pointing out, which is so devastating, is like, we don't know what people are going through because maybe they're hiding in their homes or they're putting up all of their armor and their guards because they're feeling immense grief for losing the person they were.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was really the pandemic was eye-opening too, because for anyone who had a kind of a disease that's underfunded in their lives, or even something like cancer, we got to witness what happens when our collective brain power and resources are poured into finding a cure for something. And if even a fraction of that were attention and brain power and resources were poured into ALS research, we'd have a cure. And it's hard to realize that, because at times if you're not paying attention to the system and the structures, you just think, well, we're doing our best and someday there'll be a cure. But that's not really how our system works. I don't want to turn this into like a healthcare podcast, but if ALS is more rare than most other diseases, then there's a very, there's a calculation being made, which is to say, it only, if it's only serving X number of people, a cure that we eventually find, well, then who's going to make money on this cure? And that's really where we are with ALS, even though it's impossible to understand the frequency of it because the data around people get IMALS has come up with a number that you have a 1 in 300 chance in your life to get ALS. And that's very different from what people, and it's getting more and more, the frequency with which people are being diagnosed has escalated over the last few generations. But I digress to my point just of empathy and paying attention to the systems, because not that I don't think COVID and the vaccine are worthy causes of our resources, but if we're able to harness that human power in that way, there are many ways that we could harness that human power.
I agree. I think it's an example of how we can do it. And I think the challenge is that like, it doesn't need to get to a point where like, we're like, I don't know, seeing headlines of like, 100,000 more deaths, right? Like I feel like maybe that's where we are. And that's the empathy sort of muscle we need to build, is like, we don't need to get to these places of like, okay, now that my loved one
Mm-hmm.
has been impacted, now I'll care, right? Like we need to start far before that is maybe the point I'm making.
Yeah. And I'm guilty of that too, so much with charities and friends, things that friends work in. If it's not in my life, I give it the old 50, here's my $50 donation, but I'm not putting much time into understanding what that person's experience is like. And then you get inside something like ALS and you can't, I think it's oftentimes tragedy. Most times, if you're willing to go through it, tragedy leads to just immense levels of compassion. So like coming out of the year with my dad and seeing what ALS was and what people have to go through who are caretaking, and like how it just shatters, the lives of the people in it. Like I can't help but now when I hear of anything that a friend is going through that even touches on that remotely, like I'm in a completely different place with how I react to that.
Yeah. Well, we can only hold so much. So, I empathize with the here's the money kind of thing. I am sort of overwhelmed over here in my world. Like I get that. But I also think it's like it's perspective too. Like we, as a recovering people pleaser, it's not like we don't have to like hold all of the stuff like in our hearts. Like we can find pockets of like genuine like showing up for people and not taking on all of their emotion and pain, and that's part of the practice of empathy, I think, is like figuring out the boundaries piece to it.
Yeah for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that about ALS. It hasn't been discussed on this show. I think it's important. I personally didn't realize it was fatal 100% of the time. Like that's devastating. I'm so deeply sorry that you had to experience that and be witness to that with your father. Like I so get like on a deep level the wanting to preserve and hold on to what we know we are, because that's what your dad doing that, right? Like sort of like waiting till the last possible minute. Maybe that's not the right way to say it, but just like holding on for dear life to like who he was, because that's who he knew, that's who he valued, that's how he was received, that's the intrinsic value that he built up in his relationships and stuff. And I so like feel that grief so deeply.
Well, thank you for showing up for it, even while you were reading it, just being present for it. I think one of the things that was really eye-opening, a couple of things, and this piece about ALS, it ended up being challenging when you would explain to people what was happening. And some of it was just your own personal grief of, if you tell someone that, your dad has ALS or anyone in your life, and it's 100% fatal, and it's like this insidious shutting down of muscles that no matter what you do, you can't stop. You want to see something like that reflected back in the person when you say it. And that's where this sheer understanding of what ALS is matters, because if I tell, you expect this kind of gravity, or you covet it, or you desire it as a human being. If you're saying this thing that is so difficult, but the person doesn't know what it is, and they're just kind of like, oh, that's too, just, that's so sad to hear. It's like, no, you don't understand what this thing is. And so that understanding became very valuable to me during the process of my dad, because when I would meet someone and they understood it, it was like I could breathe a sigh of relief that there wasn't like a diminishment of the experience, which is this weird, I don't know, is it a weird, like kind of like health Olympics thing we do sometimes? I don't know. I'd have to dig deeper.
We do that. I win the gold.
That's right. And just avoiding things that people would say along the way, like, well, if you work hard, it'll all come back, kind of stuff. And you're like, oh my God, if only. But to the point about my dad, I was always in I was always in awe of, not always, the last few years before his ALS diagnosis, as I myself got a little older and away from chasing certain parts of life that I realized I didn't really want. I just thought that I wanted. I was in awe of how he structured his life and the value in which he took from which he took small endeavors. And I would go home and very much respect that his joy came from his morning coffee and the crossword puzzle with my mom and seeing a bird on the drive to work. These seem like things that can never be taken from you. And that's how I thought of them for a very long time. And I don't know what it means now or how I view life that they were taken from him. And so this man who I thought had structured his life in a way that he gathered joy in a way that life could never take, because that's how I thought of it. Yeah. And then life did take those ways, although it didn't, the joy shifted to other things, although certainly not as much of it, but it did shift to other things. But I still don't know what to do with that feeling of, well, no, maybe it's just the impermanence of life and the constant change of life. And then this security of life is never fully there because that's the nature of being alive. But I still am wondering what to do with that. This idea that no matter how much you structure the way you move through the world in a way that you can always just be present for small things, that those too can be taken from you.
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of beautifully tragic in a way. You know, I do think, and I do love that you included that in the book, you know, his sort of, he'll find a way to, figure out how to have his coffee or his morning crossword puzzle. And those small joys are so important and foundational. And I think they stick with us for a long time. And yet, we all go however we go. You know, I had a conversation with Rabbi Steve Leader on this podcast, and he, you know, he's been at the deathbed of 1,000, over 1,000 patients, right? And, you know, he wrote a book about it. His whole thing is like, you know, the fact that things end is what gives it all beauty. And I sort of get that. I get it. And at the same time, I want to rail against it. Like I feel conflicted about it because I'm with you. Like you know, you lost your father to a rare disease that kills 100% of people. And, you know, people lose themselves and they slowly lose aspects of their physical and mental self throughout the process. And what a fucking tragic thing that is, you know? So like, that doesn't seem fair, or like, why, you know, why? So like, I get to the point, and maybe I'll pose this to you, is like, why? Like, is there a why? You know, maybe like, I know spirituality or religion can help sometimes in these cases. I know you've had some sort of dabblings in that world, but like, it's tough.
Yeah. One thing that did come out of just his disease and writing the book, and it touches on what you were just saying, and then the question you asked, is that during his disease, there was a percentage of time in which I could make no sense of it. Just the cruelty of its existence, like many things in our world, didn't make sense to me. But I did reach a place, and I'm not saying he reached a place, but I reached a place where I did realize that there was something about ALS in particular that was challenging my dad in ways that no other disease could, in the ways in which he needed challenging. And he'd probably be pissed to hear me say this, because he never thought of it that way. Or maybe he's somewhere and he agrees with me now. But I did at the end realize that the ways he needed to learn could only be taught through a disease that was physically debilitating and 100% fatal, and that goes into a larger belief structure, and that I came around to while watching him and talking to the people in my life about how I was trying to position this ALS in the grand scheme of life. And so in that way, there's, as humanity, I think often about how we progress and we're trying to eradicate diseases. And then there's this part of me too that wonders, well, if we're here to learn lessons and grow, we may cure diseases, but they will morph into other challenges that challenge us in the same way, whether they're other diseases or other pursuits. Like, it feels that the earth is just going to continue evolving into one constant challenge literal ball for us as humans. And so we may, like a whack-a-mole, we may shut down one of those avenues, but we still need to be tested. Yeah. So I think that's how I started to view ALS and start to view what the point of being alive is. That's right. I'm trying to answer those questions,
Yeah. Well, and I love that. I love the whack-a-mole sort of metaphor, because I think it's reflective of reality and what we know and what has come before, right? Like that's what we know, that's what we've experienced and what we've seen to be true. And I do agree that, like, the growth that I feel like we all need to do does come through hard stuff. And whether that's dealing with something like this or the scientists trying to figure out the cure to ALS, it's all sort of this big picture, figuring out like these obstacles, figuring out these hardships, these personal sort of growth points. And maybe that's the point. Yeah. To your point. Yeah. But it's hard. It's hard. Like I grew up in an evangelical world and, abandoned that maybe in my, I guess, late teens, probably early 20s. And I've since, like, I did and I think you relate to this, I did the sort of a hard turn into like, fuck Jesus, like hard turn into like, fuck Christianity, sort of anarchic, like punk rock kid. But back, now, like, sort of as I've softened and sort of developed as a human, I've come back into a more sort of like spiritually aware, and like Buddhism is great. And, like, just, I'm a bit more soft, I guess.
Yeah, I relate very deeply to that, as someone who, the first book I ever wrote was called The Reappearing Act, and it was about playing on a college basketball team where many of my teammates were evangelical Christian, and I was going to FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, and going to an evangelical free church. I mean, I don't even know what happened during that time period, but it was during this time period that I came out as gay. And so, similar to you, I grew up Catholic, but never really gathered that Jesus died for my sins, like that kind of Catholic. We just kind of sometimes went. And then in college, I was like, in evangelical Christianity. Then when I got out of that, I swung all the way over. And I do mention that in All the Colors Came Out, to like, not really atheism, but agnostic. And now I'm settling, as my wife does point out that I can pendulum swing a little. And I've kind of settled now into, I can't live a life in which it doesn't make fundamental scientific sense in my brain. Yeah. It doesn't make emotional sense to me to have a belief system in which I think that the world is just poof done when we leave here. It just doesn't answer enough. We can talk about the nature of time and all the multiverse. Like, I just have to believe that there are mysteries that we haven't yet explored.
I like that. And I align with that. And I think, like, the way I look at it is I want curiosity. I want to lean into the mystery and not presume anything. So if there's any system that does that, whether it's a more sort of strict form of religion, like I want to avoid that. But like, I think I want to lean into the mystery. Like, to your point, like I want to be open to it, because I think maybe otherwise, maybe sort of considering otherwise is maybe a little bit maybe narrow-minded or even arrogant, right? So like I want to like lean into the forces of curiosity and mystery and allowing for things to be what they are, and just to try to be as present as possible for those forces,
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's where I am too.
And I imagine, your wife being who she is, has helped you in that journey.
Yeah, just her place in the wellness world in yoga, and she's just very present for many ideas and belief patterns, whether it's moon rituals or mythology or Buddhism. She's willing to listen and read it all. Doesn't mean she believes every part of it, but she's very much so willing to be open and present for those things. And she also didn't, as I like to say, I had a bad experience. She didn't have a bad experience. And I think so.
Right.
Sometimes she tries to encourage me, if I find out, if I find out like someone's very fundamentalist Christian, I have to like kind of do a bit of a detox in myself to make sure like don't make assumptions, don't stay present for the relationship, because you don't know what maybe they believe in Bible Jesus, not colonizer Jesus. You don't know which Jesus they believe in. But yeah, she felt Catherine, my wife, just because it's just so much part of yoga and mindfulness that she's been God's godsend. That's an appropriate way of putting it.
There you go. Yeah. I was just reflecting on the deep cavern between Bible Jesus and colonizer Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's an interesting topic. We don't need to get into that, and I won't force you to get into that, but it's certainly a piece of the puzzle that sort of like made me leave eventually.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is definitely tied up in capitalism, racism, empathy. Just how much those things are reinforced in colonizer in the Bible as a colonizing mechanism. But yeah, it wasn't it wasn't as if evangelical Christianity in college, I just got away from it. It's only been lately where I've really started to even tiptoe back to be like, what is going on with all of that? And why are they like that? I just kind of wanted to get away, but it's been the last couple of years. I'm like, oh yeah, it just reinforces the power structure of our world. Got it. Check.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to me a bit, Kate, about where you are at now with surrendering and what surrender looks like to you.
I'm much better than I used to be. And let's take the book itself for an example, a little bit of full circle here from my feeling of being adrift that I mentioned at the beginning. I hold on very tightly to things, and I want them to go the way I want them to go, and I want to be in control of them, and I have all of these ideas about how it should go. When it goes here, I'm specifically talking about the book. Like I 5 years ago, me would never surrender to the book. And by that meaning surrendering to the book is that books have life of their own. This is an overused metaphor, but in the same way that you have a kid and you release it into the world, like no matter what your book is, or no matter what you think it should be, the world just has to react to it. And that is not something I can control. And you try to control it by like sending every email you can think of to every person you know, and like thinking that every time you post about it on social, that's helpful. There are all these things that you're trying to do. And having seen my dad and renegotiating in my own mind what surrender means, and coming from a sports background where surrender was just synonymous with giving up and quitting, and renegotiating that for myself as I watched my dad about what a powerful gesture it would have been at various points during his disease for him to say, it's my time, and I can't keep fighting against this disease, and I can't keep holding on because of the collateral damage. I did start to see that him embracing it as he did at the very end, that this is not, I need to let go. I try to apply that in my life. Now, I'm not great at it all of the time, but in the case of this book, I've been much better at it than I previously am, which is to say that just letting the book do whatever it's going to do in the world, and me not having to hit everybody up that I know and like be pitching people all the time and thinking that I'm going to control the outcome of it. That's something I've let go of a lot. And it's healthy. It doesn't mean that I'm not thinking about it sometimes. I'm like thinking about what I can do to make it better and to get people to care. It's still on my mind, and I'm hoping this is like the beginning of a pattern, because you can only, many things that you do in life, they just have to find their own way in the world. And that's something that, whether it comes to putting goodness out to the world, and whatever that looks like for you, sending pie to a friend who's struggling, whatever it may be, you just have to let that goodness go out into the world and surrender to whatever the energies are that are out there. I don't pretend to have it pinned down. And that's something I would never have said 5 or 10 years ago. We've been like, what's the point of sending that pie? Like, and I've been like, whatever, I'll just send him a text. But it's like something that's very specific in me now, that I know, having been through what I went through with my dad, how meaningful small things are and how that's the give and flow of the world. And I want to be a part of that now in a way that I didn't before.
It's so beautiful. I love that so much. And it makes me think about what you said earlier about these almost like big romantic gestures. Like we think that's what the world is, but it's not. It's not at all. It's these small, kind, beautiful, empathetic acts of kindness and joy that maybe are getting lost because we're not paying attention,
Yeah. And that's definitely one of the things I learned, right? I don't need to wait 10 years to surprise a friend at their birthday. It's like, no, just write them a card today, and let those things pile up, and in the richness of your world it'll surprise you.
Agreed. How is your mom doing?
She's doing great. She'll probably listen to this because she loves podcasts, and if I'm on a podcast, then it's extra special to her. But she's doing really well. She has the understanding and the awareness of how hard. She didn't bury or lie about how hard caretaking was and how much it limited her ability to move in the world, because ALS doesn't just take away the movement of the person with it. It then has these ripple effects. And my mom being the next in line, my dad literally couldn't move. And my mom would go weeks where like Target was like, or like the little store, the co-op around the block was like the only place she would venture out into. So she's very grateful just to be able to move in the world again, and to be able to do the things that she wants to do after not just ALS, but my dad was someone who was amazing and fun and who loved doing stuff with us, but he really loved doing what he loved to do with us. And, so it'd be like something where I remember when I was growing up, we loved watching Oprah back in Oprah's heyday. And every time you'd hear my dad's car pull up, we knew we put on ESPN like right away, because we knew he wasn't going to want to watch Oprah. We knew we should just have like Stuart Scott and Sports Center on. And so a lifetime of that, my mom still takes pleasure in just at night turning on Netflix and knowing whatever show she wants to watch, she's going to watch. And it's a very small thing, but I think it's indicative of her life right now, just wanting to reclaim it as her own while still grieving him and what they had.
Yeah. Both things simultaneously. Yep. Yeah. And I wanted to just thank you for including that piece, the caregiving piece in it, because it often goes unnoticed. And I so like want to give your mom so much credit for the courage it takes to like say, this is fucking hard. This is, hurting me. And at the same time, like I need to do it. And like the messiness of that, like containing that within the book was so important.
Thank you. I was blown away living it, that I had never, that there was this unseen world. It's just unseen. And we think of it as one thing, but being inside of it, it was debilitating and exhausting and tiring and scary. And I was really surprised by all of that, because it's not messaged in our culture that it's going to feel like that and look like that. So I wanted to make sure that even if it was a snippet, I wanted to make sure that I highlighted that and honored her in this larger piece of honoring my dad. A thing because he was the basketball guy and I played basketball. I've spent a lot of my life honoring him, and I'm very much looking forward to in small but beautiful ways honoring my mom.
Do you feel, I know like toward the, obviously like toward this second part of your second chapter or whatever of your life, like there hasn't been much basketball. Do you see maybe a future where you're playing some pickup games or something here and there?
Well, probably not the playing, but it has been fun for me the last month. It is that I don't know why. I've just started to watch the NBA playoffs the last month, and our team, the New York Knicks, that I mentioned in the book, happened to be good this year for the first time in 20 years. And I've been paying attention and watching, and it's nice. It's nice. It's like it's the sounds of it are very reassuring to me, in the same way that anyone who grew up watching the NFL, that those Sunday sounds of whatever station is carrying the game and the broadcaster's voice. These are, for some people, maybe they're triggering in ways I can't recognize right now. But for me, just the sounds of a basketball game being on, they're soothing, and they're back in my life. And I don't quite know why. Nobody needs me to know about them. Nobody's paying me to talk about them as they used to. But I just, for some reason, have been just streaming the games in bed at night out of nowhere. So
I love that. Well, it feels maybe I'm projecting, or it feels a little bit too sort of poetic or something, but it feels like kind of honoring to your dad, right? Like, you had these experiences as a child, and they were, part of the familial dynamic growing up, and they brought a certain level of coziness,
And I think that it's kind of the baby in the bathwater thing, where sick of it, sick of basketball. And I was like, I'm done watching it. But that can be good for a time period where you renegotiate for yourself what you're passionate about. But it's not, there's a reason I loved it. There's a reason that we watched it growing up. There's a reason that it matters. And I think coming back around and taking from it what I love about it, that feels like the more mature place to be, then like I'm done with that, because it's a part of me. And I think being in this place now where I can be present for it in the way that I want to feels right.
Love it. I love that.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, Kate, let's start to wrap up here. There is a section at the end of every episode of this podcast where we honor our empathy heroes. So people in our lives who are deeply empathetic, people, maybe even like characters from stories or books or movies we love. People we may not even know. So I will go first, name my empathy hero this week to give you a moment to think about yours. My empathy hero this week is someone I've mentioned before, but I've been listening to her new podcast. Of course, it's Glennon Doyle, and her new podcast is We Can Do Hard Things. I was listening to her latest episode on boundaries this morning, and I read Untamed last year, blown away by it. It was really my first introduction to Glennon, and I love her writing. I love her courage. I love her heart, and the way that she talks about boundaries as someone who is trying to navigate the intricacies of boundaries right now with family and what that looks like. I just so appreciative of her voice in the world. So if you listeners aren't aware of Glennon Doyle, you're living under a rock. And if you're not aware of her new podcast, We Can Do Hard Things, it's wonderful, and I highly recommend it. And that's why Glennon is my empathy hero this week.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, my empathy hero is my wife. And I've alluded to some of the reasons why here on the podcast. But one of the main reasons why is that she's very present and intuitive for our interactions and how the ways in which my patterns growing up are affecting our relationship. She's very good at pointing them out, but in a very kind, soft way. And I think one of the very specific things that I think changed our marriage was that I was doing this thing to her where I wasn't trusting that she could be okay with failure. I was so worried that if anything didn't work in her life, she would just crumble. And this was all wrapped up into what we were talking about earlier with, because she feels her feelings. When I see her feeling her feelings, it means to me that she's out of control. Yep. And so when she, if something didn't work or if she had failed at something and she'd be like really deep, low in the feelings, I translated that to mean that like she could never bounce back from it or that it was wounding her in some permanent way. So I started to get very scared that she shouldn't even try things because what if they didn't work? Because then we'd go to the scared, dark place. Yeah. And she's so present and empathetic that she's very nimbly called that out, saying, I don't think you're trusting me. I don't think you're trusting that I can handle my own feelings and that me pursuing things and them not working out is not something that you should be controlling to keep me from potential eventual feelings. And this was a very, very big breakthrough for me, just her naming that. So I was like, you're very right. You are incredibly accurate that I am scared of you trying things because you might get sad. And that is not a place you want to be.
What a profound realization. I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it definitely changed our marriage. And all because she's incredibly empathetic. So that's why she's my hero.
Amazing. Well, and her name's Catherine, right?
That's right. And she probably won't listen to this. So that isn't even trying to get bonus points in our marriage. That's just incredibly true.
Yes. I appreciate that. Well, Kate, this was wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this. Where can the listeners, the Feely humans, if you will, out there connect with you? Obviously, buy your book, all that stuff.
So, like many authors, I would advocate for buying the book through your local bookstore, so we can keep those doors open. Or if you want to buy them online, you can go to bookshop.org, which will let you do the Amazon thing, as in buying it online without going anywhere, but you can buy it through a local bookstore. Even if your own local bookstore is not on bookshop.org, just buy it through someone else's local bookstore. Yep. So that's bookshop.org. And I'm on the socials. I don't know how much I'm going to be on the socials now that the book is out, because I was very much like, okay, I got to be on here for that. But I don't find it to be the best place for me. But I am at Kate Fagan 3. I spend the most time on Instagram. So if anybody wants to connect with me there, that is the most likely place I will be.
Wonderful. Well, listeners, those links, the bookshop.org link specifically, and Kate's Instagram will be linked on the show notes for this episode at feelyhuman.co. Kate Fagan, thank you so much for being a part of this. Thank you for writing your wonderful book, All the Colors Came Out, and for being you.
This has just been lovely. So thanks for the chat, as the Brits say. I appreciate you having me on.
You're very welcome. And to you listeners, as I always say, I'm here, you're here. We're here together on this wayward, overwhelming, awe-inspiring pale blue dot. We have each other. It's you, me, empathy.